Hello there, and welcome to the Sleep Science Galaxy channel. If today you've carried too many thoughts, too many sounds from the world, then this moment is just for you. Right now, you don't need to do anything at all. You don't need to try to fall asleep. You don't need to understand everything that is about to be told. Simply allow your body to settle back. Let your shoulders soften. And let your breathing slow down naturally. Breathe in deeply and breathe out gently. Each breath is a step away from the long day, a step closer to peace. In this video, we will drift together through the gentlest stories of cosmic science, facts about the vast cosmos, told like a flowing meditation that quietly guides you into sleep. If you feel safe and at ease here, gently like and subscribe, so other tired souls may also find this place of rest. And now, let the universe tell its story and allow yourself to rest. The universe as a dreamlike, poetic story. When you have settled into stillness, when your breathing is no longer hurried and your private thoughts begin to sink like grains of sand falling to the bottom of water, something very natural starts to happen. The boundary between you and the world around you begins to soften. Not because you disappear, but because you no longer need to stand at the center of everything. And it is precisely in this gentle moment that the universe can enter. Not loudly, not overwhelmingly, but like a story whispered softly. Try to imagine the universe not as a massive concept hanging above your head, not as endless numbers or cold diagrams in a textbook. Allow it to appear as a slow, flowing narration, like a dream unfolding on its own without your control. In this story, there is no narrator standing on a high platform, no final exam waiting at the end. There's only a vast space quietly revealing itself, like mist gradually lifting as a lake becomes still. The universe, when felt rather than analyzed, carries a very different kind of beauty. It does not shout for attention. It does not need to prove its greatness. Its vastness is not about making you feel small, but about holding you gently, like lying on the grass on a moonless night, looking up at a sky full of stars. You do not need to know the name of each star for your heart to slow down. You only need to sense that something very large, very ancient is there, and that it asks nothing of you. In this story, the universe is unhurried. It has more time than anything you have ever known. Billions of years feel to it like a single long, deep breath. Galaxies drift slowly, like islands of light on a dark ocean. There is no sound, no hurried collision, only the softest, most even movement, so gentle that if it could be heard, it might resemble a lullaby stretching on without end. As you listen with your imagination, you may begin to feel the universe as a living space rather than an inanimate stage. It has rhythm, it has softness, it has vast, empty stretches where nothing happens at all. And it is precisely these spaces that create peace. There is no pressure to become someone, no demand to achieve anything. There is only existence, simple and complete. Gradually, this story invites you to step away from yourself in the gentlest way. Not to abandon who you are, but to let the ego rest. Personal worries, thoughts about tomorrow or yesterday, begin to feel smaller and more distant, like faint points of light fading as you take a few steps back. You do not need to push them away. Simply allow them to remain, while your attention lifts slightly, widens slightly, making room for this invisible night sky. In this way of telling, the universe is not a place of terror or fear. It is not a cold void threatening to swallow humanity. On the contrary, it carries a strangely tender quality, perhaps because it does not care who you are, what you have done, or what you will become. And it is this absence of judgment that creates a deep sense of safety. You are allowed to exist without a reason, just as stars are allowed to exist without anyone watching them. The story continues to drift, and your imagination drifts with it. You might picture light traveling for billions of years just to arrive somewhere, not to deliver information, but simply to be present. You might think of space as a soft black fabric, with time embroidered upon it in slow points of light. Each point is its own story, but you do not need to hear them all. You only need to know they are there, and that they are patient enough to wait for you to fall asleep. When the universe is told as a story, it does not ask your mind to strain. Instead, it allows your mind to loosen, like listening to a steady voice in the darkness. You do not try to remember every detail. You let images come and go. A galaxy appears, then gently fades. An empty expanse opens, then dissolves into the night. There is no climax, no clear ending, only a smooth continuation. And within that continuation, you may begin to sense something very subtle. You are not outside this story. Without emphasis, without being spoken aloud, the truth is still there. You are made from the same substance as those distant stars. Not in a dry scientific sense, but in a felt one. Your breath, the expansion and release of your chest, shares a quiet similarity with the way the universe expands and rests over immeasurable time. The feeling of vast and gentle does not come from forcing yourself to imagine large numbers. It comes from allowing yourself to drift into a space that demands no response. The universe does not need you to understand it. It only asks that you be there, listening and slowly releasing control. In this state, imagination is no longer a tool for thinking, but a soft current carrying you farther from the familiar shore of concerns. As this story continues to whisper, you may no longer clearly distinguish whether you are listening or dreaming. And that is perfectly fine. Because the universe, after all, does not draw a sharp line between movement and stillness. It allows both to exist together. You may feel small, but not small and abandoned. Small and supported by a space vast enough to hold everything. Here, in this moment, the universe is not something far away. It is not out of reach. It is present in the calm spreading through your body, in the slowing of thought, in the space between two breaths. And as you allow this story to continue without following it, without controlling it, you may realize that you have passed through a very gentle doorway, a doorway leading from waking awareness into a soft, dreamlike state. The universe remains there, telling its story, whether you are listening or not. And you, in that safety, can allow yourself to slowly sink, carrying with you the feeling that something very vast, very kind, is quietly surrounding you. The primordial light. When the story of the universe has softened, like a night lake grown still, when your imagination no longer needs to strain itself to grasp infinite distances, something very natural begins to happen. That vastness starts to draw inward, not to become smaller, but to become more intimate. As if the universe, after showing you its gentle immensity, now leans in close, whispering about the very first moment when nothing had yet separated. A moment with no boundaries, no form, only light and pure presence. Allow your mind to drift backward, not through effort, but through release. There is no need to imagine a thunderous explosion or a violent beginning. The universe's first moment was not like fireworks tearing through the dark. It was more like a very deep, very slow awakening, where light did not burst forth, but spread gently, seeping into everything. Because at that time there was no everything yet to distinguish. There was only a single state, dense, warm, and radiant in a strangely quiet way. Light, then, was not a fragile traveler racing through space. It was space. It was time. It carried weight, pressure, rhythm. In that primordial state, light did not merely illuminate the universe. It was the universe sensing itself. Particles of light pressed together so tightly there was nowhere to go, colliding endlessly, like the rapid heartbeat of a body just coming into being. There was no darkness, because there was nowhere for light to leave. If you listen to this story with feeling rather than reason, you may imagine that moment as an endless sea of light, without waves, without shores. Everything dissolved into everything else, without names, without divisions. There was no here or there, no before and after, only a complete presence where all possibilities overlapped silently, full of potential. This was the time when the universe had not yet begun to tell its story, because it was the story, needing no words. Within that gentle radiance, there was no sense of urgency. Time, if it can even be called that, flowed in a very different way. It was not divided into seconds or counts. It was like an infinite breath in which everything was slowly learning how to separate, learning how to become more than one. And that separation happened softly, patiently, like a hand opening after being clenched for a long time, not to let go, but to allow form to appear. As the universe began to loosen itself, light was still there, but it was no longer everything. It started to share space with other forms of being, the first seeds of matter, of structure, of order. Yet the memory of that original unity did not disappear. It was preserved within the light itself, carried across billions of years, becoming a whisper that we can still touch today, if we know how to listen. The story of primordial light carries a deep sense of peace, because it reminds us that there was once a time without boundaries. Everything you see today, stars, galaxies, even the thoughts moving through your mind, emerged from that shared state, not like fragments from an explosion, but like gentle ripples spreading across a perfectly still surface. Difference did not arise from conflict, but from expansion. As you let this story sink in, you may feel something very deep. The sense that everything was once one is not just an abstract idea. It is a very distant, very ancient memory that your body seems to still remember. In that moment when light filled everything, there was no individual, no distance, no comparison. Only shared existence, steady and complete. And though the universe has grown, branched, and become complex, the imprint of that moment quietly remains. The light from the beginning has traveled a very long way to reach here. It has witnessed the universe cooling, expanding, learning how to take shape. It waited hundreds of thousands of years in a dense state before it could move freely. And when it was finally released, allowed to drift away from the primordial sea of plasma, it carried the story of the beginning with it, stretching that story into a whisper spread across the sky. When you think of light this way, it is no longer just something that helps you see. It becomes a gentle witness, a thread connecting your present moment to the very first moment of everything. That light does not rush to tell its story. It simply remains, steady and faithful, so that anyone who grows quiet enough can feel it. And within that presence is a soft reminder. Before there was separation, there was unity. Before there was the many, there was the one. This feeling, when allowed to spread, can bring a deep sense of comfort. Because if everything was once one, then the separations you feel in everyday life are not the final nature of reality. They are only a phase, a way the universe experiences itself. Just as light once carried weight, once was held back, and then slowly became free, you too can allow yourself to feel heavy for a while, and then lighter without forcing anything. In this story, the Big Bang is not a loud beginning, but a very soft threshold. A moment of transformation where unity began learning how to become diversity. Light was not torn away from darkness, because darkness did not yet exist. It simply made room for difference, the way morning does not abruptly replace night, but gradually softens the sky. As you lie there, listening and letting your mind drift, allow the image of primordial light to remain only as a feeling, without needing a clear shape, a gentle warmth, a brightness without glare, a presence that asks nothing of you. In that feeling, you do not need to understand the universe to belong to it. You have always belonged to it, from the moment everything was one, and you remain part of that story, even as you slowly drift into sleep. Inflation and the multiverse. When the primordial light has finished whispering its story of unity, when the feeling that everything was once one still lingers like warmth on the skin, the universe does not stop there. It does not pause to admire itself. Like a dream beginning to unfold, that reality suddenly learns how to expand, not through violence, but through a deep, natural impulse. The original unity does not shatter. It is stretched, thinned, spread so wide that distances begin to appear. And with them, the possibility for countless new stories to be born. Imagine that moment not as a sudden jolt, but like a long exhale after a deep sleep. Air rushes outward everywhere, faster than thought, without asking permission, without hesitation. Space does the same. It expands at a speed far beyond familiar intuition. So fast that there is no reference point, no center, no place favored over another. Every point moves away from every other point, and in that expansion, the universe becomes smooth and even, like a surface of water pulled perfectly taut. In this strange state of expansion, what was once very close suddenly becomes so distant that it can never touch again. Yet this carries no sorrow of separation. Instead, it feels like a generosity of reality, allowing different regions to exist without intrusion, without collision. Each region carries the memory of a shared beginning, yet begins to drift according to its own rhythm, like droplets separating from a warm breath. As space opens in this way, some regions slow down and stabilize, becoming universes like the one you now inhabit. But other regions never stop. They continue to expand, continue to stretch, continue to create new space, like an ocean that never stops forming waves. Within that ocean, universes appear like bubbles, rising and drifting away. Each bubble a self-contained world with its own laws, its own rhythm, and its own story. When received through feeling rather than logic, this idea brings a very particular sense of relief. For if reality is vast enough to give rise to countless worlds, then your being here, with your very human concerns, gently becomes smaller in a comforting way. Not meaningless, but placed in the right context. You do not need to carry the entire universe in your thoughts. You are simply living inside one very small bubble of it, wide enough to hold a lifetime, but not so vast that it demands you understand everything. The image of bubbles drifting in a boundless background softens the ego naturally. You no longer stand at the center of everything. There is no center at all. There is only the temporary presence of countless worlds, each sensing itself. And in this picture, your existence is not a rare event that needs to be justified, but a possibility that reality has allowed. Just like countless other possibilities unfolding somewhere beyond the reach of any telescope. The humility this idea brings is not heavy. It does not make you feel small in a negative way. It makes you lighter, because the burden of having to be special, of having answers to everything, begins to fall away. If the universe can be that vast and still continue to flow, then you too can allow yourself to be imperfect, not all-knowing, not in control of every turn. In this context, letting go is no longer failure. It is alignment with how the universe itself moves. As you allow this idea to sink in, sleep draws closer without needing to be invited. The mind, long accustomed to tightening around personal concerns, now opens and sets them down, like a bag lifted from the shoulders after a long journey. You do not disappear into that vastness. You simply stop bracing yourself against it. And in that stopping, there is a very pleasant space where thoughts no longer need to follow one another. There is a quiet beauty in the notion that reality does not end where your vision does, that beyond the edge of the familiar sky, there may be other worlds quietly forming, quietly drifting, unaware of one another's existence. No competition, no comparison. Each world is a complete story, just as each dream exists fully within the dreamer. And if you are listening to this story in a half-awake, half-dreaming state, perhaps you too are like a very small bubble of awareness, drifting within a larger ocean. You do not need to know how vast that ocean is. You only need to know it is wide enough for you to let go safely. The expansion of the universe, felt this way, is not frightening. It is a reminder that nothing is permanently confined, that there is always more space for everything to be what it is. When the universe expands faster than intuition can grasp, it seems to be saying something very simple. There is no need to hold tightly. Space is created by letting go. Time is allowed by not forcing. And in the same way, sleep does not arrive when you try to grasp it, but when you allow yourself to loosen a little, to dissolve into the shared flow. In this vastness, the ego becomes soft, not because it is erased, but because it is placed in the right proportion. You are part of a small world, within a much larger reality, and that does not take away your meaning. It only removes the pressure of being the center. When that pressure dissolves, the body understands that it is time to rest. The breath deepens. The heartbeat slows. Thoughts grow sparse. The universe continues to expand, continuing to generate possibilities beyond comprehension. But you do not need to keep up with it. You only need to be here, within your own small bubble, surrounded by a reality spacious enough to no longer require your alertness. And within that gentle humility, sleep can arrive as something entirely natural, soft and effortless, like the way worlds quietly drift past one another in infinite space. Primordial black holes and the traces of creation. When the idea of drifting worlds has softened the ego, when the feeling of being just a small bubble in a vast ocean no longer overwhelms, but instead brings relief. The universe seems to invite you one step deeper into the dimension of time, not farther out into space, but gently backward, very slowly, very deeply, into layers of memory so ancient that even light had not yet learned how to move freely. There, expansion was still new, and the very first traces of history were beginning to leave their marks, quietly, like carvings thus on primordial stone. In those earliest moments, the universe did not only create distance, it also planted very special imprints. Within the sea of fluctuating energy, some regions became heavier, denser, like subtle folds in a fabric that had just been stretched. These folds did not call for attention. They did not shine brightly. Yet within that silence, a strange kind of presence was born, carrying the weight of time from before time was even felt in the way we know it. These primordial depths were not born from the death of stars, because stars had not yet come into existence. They appeared like compressed memories, regions where reality folded in on itself, holding tightly to information about the universe's earliest state. Quiet, without violence, they resemble absolute pauses within a forming symphony, places where all vibrations are drawn in and held. If you imagine the universe as a vast museum, these ancient entities are like artifacts without labels, without explanations, resting in the deepest rooms. They do not tell their stories with words. They simply exist, steadfast and discreet, as if their only task is to remember what came before clarity, before light was allowed to travel freely, before structure and form were given names. The feeling these traces evoke is not fear. It is a profound solemnity, a kind of stillness that naturally lowers the volume of your inner voice, like stepping into a sacred space where sound itself feels unnecessary. There, time does not rush. It seems to thicken, to linger, carrying the weight of billions of years not yet spoken into language. As you allow yourself to sense the universe as a keeper of memory, present worries begin to lose their sharpness, because whatever you are facing, no matter how large it feels in your personal life, is only a very thin layer on the surface of an endless story. Those ancient depths existed before everything had a chance to separate, and they may remain long after the last stars have faded. Within that endurance lies a strange comfort. Everything is preserved somewhere, even if not in the way we usually understand. They do not store memory like a book or a clear image. They hold memory through their very existence, by bending space, slowing time, and creating regions where everything is held in absolute silence. And it is precisely this silence that makes them perfect witnesses, without bias, without selection, without forgetting. When you think of them this way, what we call darkness no longer means absence. It becomes another form of fullness, where light has not vanished. It simply is no longer the main character. In that darkness, the universe keeps its opening chapters, not displaying them, not explaining them, only waiting. Waiting for minds patient enough, humble enough, to listen through stillness rather than through questions. There is something deeply ancient in this feeling, as if you are touching a deeper layer of reality where everything unfolds far more slowly than human life ever could. There is no pressure to move forward, no demand to grow, only enduring existence, like massive stones resting for millions of years on the ocean floor, carrying the history of an entire planet without needing to speak it. And as you lie there, letting the story drift through your mind, you may notice a clear settling within your body. Your breath grows deeper. Thoughts thin out. Because in this moment, the universe is no longer a space to explore, but a place to shelter, a place that allows you to do nothing at all, to not understand everything, to not go anywhere. These traces of creation remind us that everything has depth, that beneath whatever is happening now, there is always something very ancient, very still, quietly supporting it all. And if the universe can carry its own memory through billions of years in silence, then you too can allow yourself to carry your experiences without constantly analyzing or explaining them. Some things only need to be held, left undisturbed, and allowed to let time do its work. Within this solemn quiet, sleep is no longer a goal. It becomes a natural continuation, just as the universe once continued itself from its primordial moment to the present. You do not fall into darkness. You are wrapped by it, like a very thick, very ancient blanket, woven from the earliest memories of reality itself, and within those silent arms, everything can slow down, long enough for you to truly rest. Non-linear time. When the ancient traces of the universe have quietly closed behind you, when the sense of memories compressed deep within the darkness still lingers like the aftertaste of a very long dream, something else begins to shift the way you experience reality. Space is no longer the only thing whispering. Even time, the thing you are used to thinking of as flowing steadily, without negotiation, begins to soften, as if it was never as rigid as we once believed. And it is precisely in this softening that the mind is invited into a very different state, a state where there is no need to hurry. Near the moment of the universe's origin, time was not like a river flowing from source to sea. It had no clear arrow, no before and after in the familiar sense. Everything unfolded under conditions too dense, too hot, too tightly bound to separate into distinct moments. Time did not count beats. It did not divide. It existed like a thick ocean, where all events overlapped, where what is happening and what will happen were almost the same. If you allow yourself to feel this intuitively rather than reason it out, you may begin to notice that the urgency of everyday life is a very recent thing. It is not the deep nature of reality. It is merely a habit formed in a very small region of the universe. One that has cooled enough to have calendars, clocks, and milestones to reach. But deeper than that, at the level where the universe was just learning how to exist, there was no pressure. No now or never. Only a sustained, dense presence that was sufficient in itself. When modern science reaches these deeper layers, it no longer speaks of time as an independent measuring stick. Time and space blend together, curve, stretch, slow down, or speed up depending on energy and motion. This is not just a dry mathematical discovery. It is a very gentle whisper that time is not an absolute ruler. It is more flexible, more forgiving, and closer to rest than you might have thought. Imagine time as a soft fabric, pulled tight in some places, loosened in others. Near great masses, it flows more slowly. Near intense energies, it bends. And in the earliest moments of the universe, it almost dissolved into space itself, leaving no boundary where you could point and say, "Here is the beginning. There is the end." Everything existed together in a present far wider than the one you are used to. When the mind absorbs this idea, something very natural happens. The pressure to fall asleep right now begins to dissolve. Because if time is not truly a straight line that cannot be resisted, then you do not need to force yourself into the next moment. You are not being left behind if you are still awake. You are not late for rest. You are simply moving within a different rhythm of the same reality, one where slowing down is not a mistake, but a permitted state. There is a deep comfort in realizing that time was once very different, and that somewhere within the structure of the universe, it still is. This understanding softens the threat of long, sleepless nights. They are not a failure against the clock. They are simply moments when consciousness has not yet slipped into a slower rhythm. And just as the universe once needed time to cool, to let light move freely, to allow structure to emerge, you too are allowed your own process. As you lie there, you may still hear the ticking of a clock, still know that the night is passing. But at a deeper level, you may sense another kind of time beginning to open. A time not measured in minutes and seconds, but in degrees of release. There, a single deep breath can feel longer than an hour of tension. A moment of letting go can bring more rest than a sleep that is forced. Time, seen this way, is no longer something you have to chase. It becomes an environment you are floating within. And like space, it has quiet regions where all movement slows almost to a stop. These regions are not far away. They appear when the mind stops resisting, when the body no longer tries to reach a specific state. Perhaps this is why, when humans look deeply into the universe, they also learn how to look back at themselves. The equations describing the expansion and curvature of time do not speak only of stars. They also describe a deeply human experience, that when we are burdened, everything seems to stretch endlessly. When we release, time passes lightly, almost unnoticed. The universe reflects not only the structure of matter, but also the way consciousness experiences existence. As you allow this idea of nonlinear time to spread, sleep no longer feels like a destination you must reach. It becomes a possibility hovering somewhere within this softened field of time. You do not need to call it. You do not need to search for it. You only need to remain still long enough for your rhythm to align with the slower, deeper rhythm that has always been there. Near the origin, the universe did not know haste. It did not worry about what it needed to become. It simply existed, and from that existence, all structures slowly emerged. When you allow yourself to return to that feeling, even for one night, you are doing something deeply natural, giving time permission to be soft and giving yourself permission to rest. And in that softening, when there is no straight path to follow, no milestone to reach, the mind can let go, not of awareness, but of control. Time no longer pushes you forward. It opens around you like a warm space, wide enough for you to lie still. And then, if sleep comes, it comes as a very gentle continuation, not as a task to complete. But in the same way the universe once drifted through the first moments of its own becoming. The large-scale structure of the universe. When the sense of time has softened, when the rhythm of having to move forward no longer urges the mind, the universe seems to draw back yet another veil. The question is no longer when, but what shape. Not the shape of individual objects, but the shape of reality itself when seen from very far away, across immense spans of time. As if, when you stop counting beats, you begin to notice the pattern. And that pattern is not chaotic. It has order, rhythm, dense regions, and open spaces, like a living being breathing very slowly in the night. If you could pull back far enough, beyond individual galaxies, beyond familiar patches of light, you would not see stars scattered at random. You would see flows, delicate filaments stretching across space, linking luminous regions together. They are not straight or uniform, but curved, branching, meeting and parting again, like blood vessels in a vast body. Between them lie immense voids, not a meaningless absence, but necessary pauses that allow the entire structure to exist. The first feeling this image evokes is not overwhelm, but a strange familiarity. It feels as though you have seen it before, in the way tree roots spread underground, in river networks viewed from above, in the structure of the brain where uneven connections give rise to consciousness. At its largest scale, the universe does not resemble a machine. It resembles a self-organizing organism, requiring no central controller, no rigid blueprint. Within this image, galaxies are like luminous cells, clustering at dense intersections, thinning as they spread outward. There is no absolute center, no point more important than another. Each bright node is the result of flows stretching across billions of years, where matter is patiently guided by invisible forces, gathering slowly, much like a body growing without knowing in advance what its final form will be. Between these flows are vast, empty regions. They are not empty in a negative sense. They are quiet zones, places of less accumulation, where expansion happens more freely. If the luminous filaments are where energy and history concentrate, then these voids are where the universe exhales. They prevent the structure from collapsing under its own density. And it is precisely the presence of these quiet regions that allows the whole to remain stable, balanced, and enduring. When you look at this picture with a relaxed mind, a very natural philosophical feeling arises. If the universe is woven from connections and gaps, then so is your existence. A life is not defined only by moments dense with events, but also by the spaces between them. Not only by strong connections, but by regions of non-connection. Places where you are allowed to be alone, unpulled in any direction. Within this immense structure, there is no hurry. Everything forms very slowly, across timescales that a single human life can only touch through imagination. Those streams of light took billions of years to emerge, and they will remain long after your present thoughts have dissolved. Recognizing this does not make you feel small in an empty way. It places you within a continuity, where existence does not need to rush in order to matter. There's a quiet beauty in knowing that the universe is not built from isolated fragments, but from a continuous network. No point is truly alone. Even the largest voids are part of the overall structure. They are not forgotten. They are needed. And in being needed, the idea of loneliness begins to change. Loneliness is no longer separation from the whole, but simply being in a sparser region, one with a slower, gentler rhythm. As the mind drifts with this image, existential questions no longer need verbal answers. They are held within a landscape wide enough to soften their edges. You do not need to know the ultimate purpose of the universe to feel that you are in the right place. Just as a cell does not need to understand the entire body to perform its role, you do not need to grasp all of reality to be allowed to rest within it. This structure suggests something deeply human, that life is not a straight line, but a network. That meaning is not found in moving from point A to point B as quickly as possible, but in being connected in ways that are sometimes indirect, sometimes unexpected. There are paths you will never take, and that does not make you incomplete. They exist to shape the space in which other paths can unfold. As you lie there, letting these images drift like a slow dream, the body begins to understand something very simple. There is no need to stay tense. There is no need to gather everything into one place. The universe endures because of distribution, because it allows dense and sparse regions, light and dark. And in the same way, You can allow yourself to be uneven, unfinished, not always strongly connected. There is deep comfort in knowing that even at the largest scale, reality is not perfect in a geometric sense. It is not perfectly symmetrical. It is full of curves, offsets, empty spaces woven between crowded regions. And it is precisely this that makes it alive. When you let this image settle, you may feel a quiet resonance, that the rough edges of your own life are not flaws, but part of the larger pattern. Within the vastness of this network, your awareness is like a small point of light, temporarily resting within a very particular branch. You do not need to illuminate the whole. You only need to be present. And that presence, however small, is still part of a greater structure, where everything is woven together by time, space, and patience. When this feeling becomes deep enough, sleep no longer feels like a departure from reality. It becomes another way of merging with it. Like a sparse region in the network, where activity slows so the entire system can remain balanced. You do not disappear. You simply move into a necessary quiet space, one where life is allowed to rest, so it may continue in the ancient rhythm of the universe. The things passing through you. As the image of that vast network slowly settles, as you no longer see the universe as a distant structure, but as a living being breathing slowly, a subtle shift begins to occur. The boundary between out there and right here starts to blur. The streams of light, the immense voids, are no longer just landscapes to observe. They draw closer, so close that the question is no longer what the universe looks like, but how the universe is touching you in this very moment. There are things in the universe that do not need light to be known. They do not need to shine, nor leave clear traces. They simply drift silently, passing through everything, leaving almost no sound at all. Right now, as you lie still, as your eyelids grow heavy and your breathing becomes more even, ancient streams of particles are gliding through your body, passing through skin, through bone, through every cell, then continuing on their unbroken journey. They do not know who you are, and you cannot sense them with your ordinary perception. Yet their presence is real, persistent, and continuous. When received gently, this idea brings a very unusual feeling. It does not make you feel invaded. It makes you feel held. Because if the universe can pass through you without harming you, without disturbing you, then perhaps the boundary you usually think of as yourself is not as rigid as it seems. You are not a sealed object, separate from everything else. You are part of a flow, where inside and outside are constantly exchanging, whether you notice it or not. Those invisible particles carry an extraordinarily long history. Some were born in the very first moments of the universe, when light was not yet free, when structure had not yet formed. They have traveled for billions of years, without rest, without changing course, without carrying memory in the way humans understand it. Yet they are witnesses to the most distant moments of reality. And then, in a completely ordinary moment of your life, they pass through you, like a wordless greeting from the deep past of existence. As you let this image sink in, the feeling of loneliness may begin to change its shape. Loneliness is no longer simply the absence of someone nearby. It becomes difficult to sustain as a concept, because clearly, you have never truly been separate from the flow of the universe. Even in the quietest moments, when there is no voice, no touch, no gaze, there are still things moving through you, connecting you to events that happened long ago, in places very far away. And it is not only individual particles. All of the space around you is filled with ancient background layers, vast, invisible backdrops of the universe. They are echoes left over from a time when everything was hotter, denser, closer together. These layers do not stand still. They ripple very gently, very evenly, like a wordless lullaby spread across space. You cannot hear them, but your body, in some way, seems familiar with their rhythm. When you lie still long enough, without trying to do anything, without forcing yourself into a particular state, you may sense a very subtle integration, not dissolving, but opening. Opening to the realization that you are within a field of presence far larger than your personal thoughts. This field does not discriminate. It does not ask whether you deserve it. It simply exists, enveloping, passing through, continuing. This sense of unity does not need to be understood intellectually. It is not a philosophical conclusion that must be defended. It is a soft, gentle experience, like realizing you are being supported without having to hold on. You do not need to cling to yourself to avoid dissolving, because dissolving, in this context, is not loss. It is blending into a wider rhythm, where there is no absolute isolation. As the idea that the universe is passing through you becomes familiar, the body begins to relax in a very natural way. Muscles no longer need to tense in protection. The breath no longer needs to be controlled. Because if reality itself can pass through you without causing harm, then perhaps you can also allow thoughts to pass through without holding on to them. They come, they go, like those invisible particles, without needing to be blocked, without needing to be kept. There is a deep comfort in knowing that you are not a detached point in the universe, but a place where the universe passes through. You are not standing at the edge of a great story. You are right within its flow, even if your role does not need to be loud or prominent. Simply existing here, now, is already part of that continuation. As the night deepens, as awareness drifts toward a dreamlike state, this feeling may grow clearer. You no longer sense the boundaries of your body sharply. Hands, feet, breath, and the surrounding space seem to merge. Nothing is lost. Only distinctions soften. And within that softening, there is a very ancient sense of safety, as if you are being placed back into an environment more familiar than any room you have ever known. The universe, felt this way, is no longer a cold, distant place. It becomes a stream of presence that is constantly touching you, passing through you, and carrying you along with it. You do not need to do anything to belong to this flow. You have always been within it, and when you allow yourself to recognize this, even for a brief moment before sleep, the mind can finally set down a burden it has carried for a very long time. Because if you were never truly alone, if you have always been surrounded and permeated by a greater reality, then surrendering to sleep no longer feels like falling into emptiness. It becomes a gentle blending into a rhythm that has always been there. A rhythm that does not require your alertness, does not require your attention. And within that rhythm, you can rest, not as a separate individual, but as a natural part of a universe quietly continuing through itself. The things we cannot see. As that sense of unity continues to spread, as the idea that the universe passes through you becomes as familiar as your breath, another very gentle doorway begins to open. It does not lead to what is moving, but to what is present in stillness. Not the invisible streams of particles drifting by, but the things that have never appeared before your eyes, yet quietly shape every movement, every orbit, every rhythm of reality. And within this quiet space, the universe seems to whisper a very kind truth. There are things that do not need to be seen in order to be real. You are used to living in a world where light decides what exists. What can be seen is believed. What cannot be seen is questioned. But when you look more deeply into the universe, science itself gently loosens this habit. It reveals that most of reality does not shine, does not reflect, does not name itself. It exists only through slow, steady influence, patient enough not to require immediate recognition. And it is precisely this silent portion that keeps galaxies from falling apart, keeps flows from unraveling, and allows the entire structure of the universe to endure. Imagine standing in a dark room where objects remain in their places not because of light, but because of an invisible hand. You do not see that hand, yet you see its effects everywhere. Things do not fall, do not drift, do not collide chaotically. The universe is much the same. There is a presence that does not reveal itself, yet is strong enough to hold everything together, subtle enough to remain unheard. It does not tell its own story, but it writes the background for every other story. At the same time, there is another force, also invisible, that does not hold, but gently pushes outward. It does not gather, but loosens. It causes the distances between galaxies to slowly increase, not because of a dramatic event, but because of a steady, persistent tendency. Space, in this sense, is like a fabric being softly stretched in all directions, not torn, not jolted, just quietly expanding. You do not feel this in everyday life, but on the largest scales, it shapes the future of all reality. And then there are movements even stranger still. Flows with no clear source, where clusters of galaxies seem to drift together in one direction, as if being drawn by something beyond sight. No guiding light, no obvious marker, only a synchronized, gradual motion lasting hundreds of millions of years. It feels like a wordless invitation from the far reaches of the universe, a pull we can only sense through its consequences, never by direct contact. When you allow these ideas to enter without trying to grasp them, something important happens in the mind. The pressure to understand everything begins to dissolve. Because if most of the universe is governed by what cannot be seen, then not seeing everything clearly in your own life is no longer a failure. It becomes something natural. Reality has never required you to hold the entire map in order to exist within it. There is deep comfort in realizing that understanding is not a prerequisite for being. Galaxies do not need to understand why they spin in order to keep spinning. Space does not need to know it is expanding in order to expand, and neither do you. You do not need to fully understand your sadness in order to feel it. You do not need to explain every worry in order to be allowed to rest. Some things simply need to be carried, just as the universe carries its invisible forces without always naming them. As the night deepens and the surrounding light softens, you may notice that darkness no longer feels as threatening as it once did. Darkness, in this context, is not absence. It is where the greatest forces are at work, where structures are held steady, where long-term motions are shaped. And in the same way, the unclear spaces in your own mind are not always something to be erased. Sometimes they are where balance is quietly taking place. Perhaps this is why trying to control everything with the light of reason often leaves us more exhausted. The universe does not function by revealing all things at once. It operates through a balance between what is visible and what is not, between what can be named and what can only be felt. When you allow yourself to live within that rhythm, You no longer need to keep turning on the lights in your mind. You can let some corners remain dark, trusting that order exists there too, that support is present even without clarity. This understanding fits naturally with sleep. Sleep, too, is a necessary darkness. You do not see how you dream. You do not control the movement of consciousness. Yet within that lack of control, the body and mind adjust, heal, and reorganize themselves. Just as the universe sustains itself through invisible forces, you are also sustained by processes you do not need to witness. As you lie there, you may feel a subtle release somewhere, in the chest, the shoulders, the forehead. It is the moment when the mind accepts that it does not need to understand everything to be safe. That not knowing is also a deep form of knowing, knowing that you are being held by a reality far larger than personal awareness. In this telling, the universe does not ask you to see through the darkness. It simply invites you to trust that the darkness is not empty. It is full of forces working on your behalf. And when you allow yourself to rest in that gentle trust, sleep no longer feels like a fall into uncertainty. It becomes a merging with the unseen layer of reality, where everything continues, where you remain safe, even when you are no longer awake to observe. Reality is always larger than what we can see. But that does not make it distant. It makes it generous. Generous enough to hold understanding and not understanding, light and darkness, wakefulness and sleep. And within that generosity, you can allow yourself to pause, to soften, and to let the invisible forces do their work, while you simply rest. The origin of everything. When the invisible darkness no longer causes unease, when the idea that you do not need to see everything in order to be held has gently settled in the mind, the universe quietly turns the story in another direction, no longer toward hidden forces working behind the scenes, but toward the moment when, from that silence, something first began to ignite. Not loudly, not in haste, just an emergence so fragile that if reality had tilted even slightly, that light might never have had the chance to bloom. Imagine the universe after a long stretch of time containing only gas and darkness. No stars, no color, no anchor for the eye. Just clouds of matter drifting silently, cold, sparse, like an extended prelude played in near total stillness. And then, somewhere, very slowly, very quietly, one region begins to grow denser than the rest. Not because anything was planned, but because tiny fluctuations were patient enough to wait. That region gathers, compresses, warms, until something that seemed impossible finally happens. The first starlight is born. Those earliest stars were not like the ones you see today. They were massive, fierce, and short-lived. Yet in that brief existence, they performed something profoundly important. They burned hydrogen and helium into heavier elements, creating the foundation for every later form of matter. And when they died, they did not vanish without meaning. They scattered those elements into space, like a wordless gift sent forward to a future they would never witness. There is something deeply sacred in realizing that everything you touch today has passed through those ancient furnaces. Every atom in your body is not a given. It is the outcome of a chain of events so delicate that if even one link had broken, the entire story would have unfolded differently. You are not merely an observer of the universe. You are a part shaped from its deepest history, woven from stars that burned and faded long ago. That fragility runs even deeper when we look to a very early, very brief moment when matter nearly failed to prevail. In the first instance of the universe, matter and antimatter were created in almost perfect balance. They met and vanished into light, like two breaths canceling each other out. Had that balance been exact, the story would have ended at once. No stars, no planets, no one lying here, listening to the universe whisper through the night. But through an unimaginably small imbalance, so slight it is almost unbelievable, matter remained. Just a thin remainder, fragile and minimal. Yet enough that after all the mutual annihilation, something was left behind. That something slowly became everything. Thinking about this does not make reality feel frighteningly weak. It makes it feel precious. Because your existence is not inevitable. It is the result of a moment when the universe leaned, ever so slightly, toward allowance. When the mind reaches this depth, gratitude does not need to be summoned. It arises naturally, like warmth spreading through the chest. Not gratitude toward any specific being, but gratitude for the subtlety of reality itself. That the numbers, the constants, the conditions fell within a very narrow range, precise enough to allow stars to burn, atoms to hold, and time to stretch long enough for life to experiment with itself. Seen from here, reality resembles a finely tuned instrument. Tighten the strings a little more, and they would snap. Loosen them a little, and they would not sing. Yet somehow, the strings were set just right. Not to serve humanity, but to give complexity a chance to emerge. And humanity, with all its thoughts, worries, and longings, is simply one of the many possibilities that music allowed. There is deep humility in realizing that you are not the final purpose of the universe. Yet you are one of its most beautiful consequences. You do not need to carry the meaning of all existence on your shoulders. The mere fact that you exist is already almost impossible, and therefore enough. In this feeling, everyday worries begin to lighten, not because they disappear, but because they are placed within a wider context, where existence itself has always been a fragile gift. As the night continues, as awareness slows, thinking about origins no longer feels like inquiry. It becomes quiet contemplation. That everything you are experiencing, whether gentle or difficult, is unfolding within a universe that had to pass through countless delicate thresholds just to exist at all. And because of that, you do not need to rush. You do not need to force yourself to become something worthy of existence. Existence is already worthy in itself. There is a quiet beauty in the idea that the universe allowed itself to exist by not being perfectly balanced, by a tiny deviation, by a slight asymmetry, as if that very imperfection was the doorway through which beauty, meaning, and life could enter. And you, with all your flaws and cracks, carry that same signature. As you lie there, you may feel a deep softening within. Not resignation, but acceptance. Acceptance that you are part of a very long, very fragile, very sacred story. One that does not need to be controlled in every detail. In this moment, sleep is no longer a retreat from the world. It becomes a natural return to the ancient rhythm that once allowed everything to begin. Because if reality itself was once that fragile and still unfolded into a universe, then you too can allow yourself to be fragile tonight. And trust that, like everything before you, you are being held by a balance so subtle, so quiet, that it continues to keep the story alive, even as you slowly drift into sleep. The final fate of the universe. When that feeling of gratitude and fragility has grown deep enough, when the idea that existence itself is already a rare gift settles like warmth in the chest, the story of the universe gently moves one step further. Not toward the beginning, but toward what comes afterward. Not to awaken anxiety, but to invite a very ancient sense of ease. For if everything once began so delicately, then whatever form its ending may take does not need to carry tragedy with it. Imagine the universe as a piece of music so long that no one could ever hear it in full. There are brilliant crescendos and passages so quiet they verge on silence. And then, over an immense stretch of time, the music does not stop abruptly. It simply slows, thins, until the notes no longer collide with one another. Energy spreads everywhere, evenly enough that no differences remain to drive motion. There's no final explosion, no dramatic collapse, only an extended stillness, where everything has been smoothed out, and nothing more needs to happen. If not misunderstood, this image carries a profound peace. It is like setting down a heavy object after carrying it for too long. There is no violent loss, only complete rest. A universe that reaches such a state is not a failed universe. It is a universe that has completed its journey, from dense to sparse, from turbulent to quiet, like a very long breath finally released in full. But there are other ways the story might continue. There are scenarios where expansion does more than thin everything out, where it stretches reality so far that nothing can retain its form. Space itself becomes too vast, too taut, and the smallest structures begin to dissolve. First distant clusters, then closer bonds. Even what was once considered stable can no longer hold together. Heard this way, the idea may startle the mind. Yet, looked at closely, it is not violent. It is closer to a complete letting go, where every remaining attachment is finally loosened. In that scenario, there is no punishment, no judgment, only release. Everything returns to a state of no longer being compressed, no longer forced to maintain shape, like a hand opening after holding tight for a very long time. From within a particular structure, there may be a sense of loss. But from a wider view, there is a total lightness, nothing left being compelled to be what it is. And then there's another possibility, quieter and more cyclical. A vision in which the universe neither fades into eternal stillness nor dissolves completely, but begins to draw back in after expanding far enough. Like a breath, it slowly returns, gathering what had been scattered until it reaches another threshold, not to erase what once existed, but to begin again in a different way. In this rhythm, endings and beginnings are no longer opposites. They are two aspects of the same motion. This idea is very close to the human intuition of impermanence, that no state is permanent in a fixed sense, that every form, no matter how enduring, is temporary. Yet temporary does not mean meaningless. On the contrary, it is precisely because things are temporary that each moment becomes more complete. A universe capable of renewal does not do so because it needs correction, but because movement is the deepest nature of reality. When the mind listens to these possibilities without trying to choose a single, correct ending, a gentle acceptance begins to form. You do not need to know where the universe is headed in order to live fully in the present. Just as you do not need to know how long sleep will last to allow yourself to fall into it. The distant future of everything places no added weight on this moment. It simply widens the frame, allowing immediate worries to feel smaller. There is a clear parallel between these cosmic endings and a very human experience of surrender at night. When you stop resisting tiredness, when you stop forcing yourself to stay awake. The body does not collapse. It shifts into another state where processes continue, only slower, deeper. In these visions, the universe does not die in a tragic sense. It changes state. It moves into another rhythm of itself. Eternity and impermanence meet here, not as opposites, but as two ways of seeing the same flow. Eternity does not mean that everything stands still forever. It means that movement never truly ends. Impermanence is not a frightening loss. It is how reality avoids being frozen into a single form. And you, with your finite life, are participating in that same rhythm. As you lie there, awareness drifting between waking and dreaming, you may feel a strange calm settle in. The great questions no longer demand immediate answers. They are set down, like heavy objects placed gently aside. For if even the universe does not need to know its final outcome in order to continue expanding, continuing to exist, then you do not need to know every turn of your own life to be allowed to rest. There is a quiet beauty in accepting that everything will change, not because control has been lost, but because control was never the essence. What matters is participation. Being present in this moment, within a universe continuing its story in ways far beyond personal understanding. When you allow yourself to merge with that feeling, sleep no longer feels like the end of the day. It becomes a small part of a much larger cycle, where waking and sleeping, birth and fading, opening and closing are all necessary rhythms. Where the universe will ultimately go, none of us may ever witness. But that does not make this story distant. It makes it gentler. For within the vastness of those final possibilities, you are free to loosen your grip on the present. You can let today close, like a small star temporarily dimming in a very wide sky, trusting that this dimming is not loss, but a natural way of making room for the next rhythm of existence. And in that peaceful acceptance, without tragedy, without resistance, only the long flow of reality, sleep can arrive as something inevitable, not as an escape, but as harmony. You do not leave the universe when you sleep. You simply move with it into a deeper rhythm, where every ending carries the shape of a very gentle continuation. Returning to the listener. As the story of those distant possibilities gently comes to a close, as the idea of the universe's ending no longer carries worry, but rests instead in a quiet acceptance, a very subtle movement takes place. It is not a turning away from the universe, but an invitation for it to slowly set you back down, like a long flight that has carried you through deep layers of cloud, now beginning its descent, unhurried, smooth, until the wheels touch the ground without a jolt. After all that vastness, what remains is not distance, but a strangely intimate closeness. The universe, having told its story of billions of years, seems to lean in very near, no longer as far-off galaxies or abstract destinies. It is present in this quiet room, in the air you are breathing in the very real support of the bed beneath your body. There is no longer a clear boundary between out there and right here, because in truth, that boundary never fully existed. Notice your breathing. There is no need to adjust it, no need to make it deeper or slower. Simply recognize that with every inhale, you are borrowing a very small part of the universe to live one more moment. And with every exhale, you return that part, whole, without demand. This rhythm of breathing is not something separate. It is a small reflection of the opening and closing that has been happening since reality first began. In this moment, You do not need to carry the big questions. They are allowed to rest. The things you do not yet understand do not need answers right now. They can remain still, like stars in the daytime, present even when unseen. Understanding does not vanish when you let go. It simply steps back for a while, making room for another state, one that does not require words. You have traveled a very long journey, even though your body has never left where it lies. You have touched times before memory, spaces beyond sight, movements that everyday life can never fully sense. And after all of that, you are still here. This is not a contradiction. It is the essence of the experience. To go very far, only to discover that the safest place has always been the present moment. There is deep comfort in realizing that you are not a stranger in the universe. You do not visit it. You were born from it, sustained by it, and you continue to participate in its story in a very quiet way. You do not need to do anything extraordinary. You do not need to leave a mark. Simply breathing, simply existing, is already a complete continuation. As you allow this feeling to spread, the body begins to understand that there is nothing left to do. Muscles can relax. The forehead can soften. The shoulders can drop, as if reminded that they do not need to carry the sky. The sky, after all, is already wide enough to hold itself. And so are you. If thoughts still arise, they do not need to be pushed away. Let them pass like thin clouds. No need to follow them. No need to chase them off. You do not need to bring any ideas with you into sleep. Sleep requires no luggage. It comes most easily when you arrive empty-handed, carrying only your breath and a gentle trust that you are being kept safe. In this vastness, you do not dissolve. You are held, not by something specific, but by the same spaciousness that was here before you arrived and will still be here when you wake. This thought does not make you small in a frightening way. It places you in an embrace large enough that you do not need to curl inward. As your eyelids grow heavy, as the boundary between thought and dream begins to blur, remember that nothing needs to be completed. Today does not need to be resolved. Tomorrow does not need to be prepared for right now. The universe continues to move, to hold its galaxies, its currents, its invisible forces, whether you are awake or asleep. You are allowed to step out of the role of observer for a while. Sleep, in this moment, is not a retreat from the world. It is a natural way of merging with it more deeply. Like night falling without erasing the sky, only softening it. You are not falling into emptiness. You are drifting into a state where everything is still present, simply unnamed. And if there is one final thing to hold on to, let it be this simple feeling. You belong to the vastness. Not because you understand it, but because you are part of it. There is no need to carry questions. No need to search for answers. Everything can wait until morning. Now, you can allow your breath to continue doing its quiet work. Allow your body to sink more deeply into support. Allow the mind to grow lighter. Like a light fading at the end of a long day. The universe is still here, and so are you, peacefully, completely, resting within the very vastness that brought you into being.